Okay, before we get started for our guest speaker today, I have a couple requests. Thank you for coming in and being here with us today. The first thing I'd like for you to do is to please take out those phones and turn them off on silent and make sure they're away in your pocket. So please take a few seconds and do that for me. Thank you. Doesn't take long. Okay. If I can have your attention up here, please. We have the luxury in our school district to hear from some phenomenal people that choose to take their time to come talk to you. We're really asking you today, in the next hour, in your time in our auditorium, to please be respectful to our speaker. Please listen to the words and stories that he's going to share with you today. Give him your full attention. Let's show our speaker what kind of school and schools we are in Teton County. I really appreciate that from you as we go forward. Today, I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Dan Siegel. Dr. Siegel is an internationally... All right. Thank you for that. That's very kind. All right, thank you very much. All right, please let me introduce our speaker. Thank you, thank you. Dr. Siegel is an internationally renowned neuropsychiatrist, a New York Times bestselling author, and the executive director of the Mindset Institute, a professor at the UCLA School of Medicine, and the founding co-director of the Mindful Awareness Research Center at UCLA. Dr. Siegel's talk today will focus on three main points. Number one, myths versus realities around the teenage brain. Number two, how the way teenage brain development is presented in popular culture does not match up with the science. And number three, adolescence framed as an opportunity for growth. These points are further explored in his recent book called Brainstorm: The Power and Purpose of the Teenage Brain, and focuses on the main ideas that adolescence is not a stage in life to be endured, but a transformative period that lays the foundation for healthy adult lives, and that we should embrace four features of adolescence that occur through healthy changes in the brain during this developmental stage. Dr. Siegel's visit to Jackson is supported by the St. John's Medical Center, Teton County School District, Teton County Library, and GAP. Please welcome Dr. Siegel.
Welcome to high school.
Thank you. That's so great. That's so wonderful to be here with you, and it's really great that all of the students are here, all of you are here. So let me ask you a question. How many of you have been told that adolescence is going to be a really rough time of your life? Anybody told that? Raise your hand. So most people, okay. Now, the thing about that statement is if you're told something, sometimes you try to live in a way that makes what you're told actually come true. So the first thing I want to address with you is these idea of myths, which is a thing that's common in a culture, but may not be really based on reality. So the first myth is the idea that adolescence has to be something that is in fact rough, or something you should hurry up and get through, or something that is only going to be having negative things, and if you could just get through it without getting hurt, that would be a miracle. But those myths are actually not very helpful. So what are the truths that we now know? The first thing I just want to say is that you, at this age period, have an incredible opportunity that rather than thinking of this as a terrible time, it's actually an amazing time of possibility. And schools and your family, your parents, your relatives, and the larger culture can change the way they understand adolescence to understand the following myths that are wrong and the truths that we're now understanding when we look at the science of adolescence. So one of the myths that is built on this idea that it's going to be rough is something where you'll hear parents talk about this. They'll say, oh my gosh, those hormones are going to go crazy. Anybody hear about that? Right, raise your hand if you've heard that myth. And, you know, I go all around the world, and whether it's adolescents themselves or parents, you hear that. And first of all, there is no such thing as a crazy hormone. I just want to make that clear. There's no such thing as a hormone with anger management problems, and they need to have therapy. Hormones change, of course, because your body is developing. That's natural. And rising hormones do affect the way your brain functions, which we'll talk about in a moment. But there's no such thing as raging hormones. Now, if you were told that, let's say as a 10-year-old, what you're about to go through is these crazy molecules called raging hormones are going to take over your body, how would you feel about that? Ah, right. Exactly. So instead, what we now know, if the myth is about raging hormones over here, if you were asked by your teacher tomorrow, what's the truth about that story? The truth is it's something called brain remodeling. So there's a really big thing that's happening at your age. The brain is actually restructuring itself. So if you think about the first dozen years of life, bless you, a kid at that age is having their brain constructed based on both genetic information, what's happening in your genes, and experience. And when you're that age, you're just soaking in like a sponge what adults are telling you the world is like. And that's fantastic. You just soak it in, your brain changes its structure based on those experiences. But something really big happens in adolescence that we didn't understand until recently, which is that this structure that was set up when you were an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old, and 10-year-old, instead of just continuing to build, it's now remodeling itself. And so the truth about adolescence is it's about brain remodeling. Now, the second thing, it's a myth, is that adolescence is something you should just hurry up and get through. But in fact, when you look at what this brain remodeling is allowing your brain to create, and we'll talk about that just in a moment, it's actually exactly what you should keep going your entire life. When you look at some outcomes of brain remodeling, you can see that this is something that you need as an adult. Now, you may have read that. How many of you read those first beginning, the 3 pages in the beginning of Brainstorm? Did everyone read that? Raise your hand if you got a chance to read it. So just a few people. So let me just highlight some of the summaries from that so you can know, and it spells the word essence. And let me just check out, is this microphone working okay? Yes. It's working fine. Okay. All right. Good. Good. That's good. I worked really hard. That makes me feel really accomplished. Okay, so let's do this, because when you look at this myth that you should hurry up and get through adolescence, when you realize these 4 things I'm about to tell you, what's called the essence of adolescence, then in fact you'll see it's the opposite of something you should just rush out of. And so the very things that we're told, like, you know, I started in pediatrics, you know, taking care of kids, and then I transferred over to psychiatry and then became a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and then I started teaching at UCLA, the training program for anyone working with teenagers. I was in charge of that educational program. And at the same time, I had 2 little kids at home. And then when my little kids became just before puberty, which isn't the same as adolescence, but just before puberty, my friends were telling me, oh my God, the raging hormones are coming and it's going to be terrible and hope they get through it really fast. And even my pediatrician said that to me. And it was so sad because these were myths that make you not realize that this is an age of opportunity, not just of challenge. So let's go over the 4 essences that are the way you can look at this in a deep way. And here's the take-home messages I want to start with. If I tell you your brain is remodeling, which it is, so how many of you are between 12 and 18 years of age? Let me just see. That's everybody. Yeah, let's hear a hand for that. Okay. So you made it through the first years of life. Your brain grew in this beautiful way, and that's fantastic. Now here's what the next 12 years have to offer you. And the reason I'm telling you this is not just because it's maybe interesting or it's what the science says. That's fine. Those things are true. But what I'm about to say to you can change the rest of your life. Hold on. What I'm about to say to you can change the rest of your life because what you're about to learn can actually set the stage for you to get your brain to remodel in a certain way. So what we need to do in this brief time is, because I know you have lots of questions that have been written down, and we're going to take part of our time to answer those questions. But what I'm going to do is just outline how you can use what I'm about to say to change the way your brain grows. Because the myth of raging hormones basically says there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do, but your hormones are going to rage, and that's the end of the story. But with brain remodeling, how do you get your brain to grow in its remodeling in a different way? Does anybody know? Well, here's the answer. Where your attention goes, neural firing flows, and neural connection grows. So let's walk that through. Where attention goes, you with me? Where attention goes, you get your brain to fire off in certain ways. Neural firing flows. And here's the amazing thing. Where you decide to pay attention, how you decide to pay attention, can get your brain to grow either in a kind of this way or in a this way. And we'll talk about those different ways. But it's actually up to you. Where attention goes, neural firing flows, and neural connection grows. So unlike the myth of the raging hormones where you're helpless and hopeless, the story that's true about remodeling means you're in the driver's seat. So where you focus attention will get your brain to get active in a certain way. And in my field, in medicine, we've been able to show that how you get your brain to fire determines how it wires up. It's that simple. So after this presentation, you are in the driver's seat of what's going to happen with your brain. It's not about raging hormones. It's not just about being a teenager. It's actually you being a human being with a mind, and here's the secret to the sauce. Your mind can get your brain to do things. So let's give you one example of that, and then we're going to look at these 4 elements. I'm going to do a little experiential exercise with you, just so you can not just have all these words, but you're going to get a feeling for it right now. Okay, so just get yourself sitting in your seat. This may not be so pleasant, but it's worth going through, because when people go through it, they get a feeling like, okay, now I understand what you're talking about. So I'm going to say a word, and I'm going to repeat it several times. And all you need to do is feel whatever you feel. Then I'm going to pause. Then I'm going to say another word, and I'm going to repeat it several times. You feel whatever you feel. And we're going to pause, and then I'll have you do some other things. Okay? You guys ready? Okay? All right. Okay, here we go. So sit up straight in your chair. Get yourself ready. What you're about to do, beautiful. What you're about to do is focus your attention and bring whatever's going on in your body into awareness. We've done a study at UCLA that shows people who do this actually develop both intuition and wisdom. No kidding. And people who can't do it are kind of lost. So the cool thing about this is you can learn how to do this. It's very simple exercise. So here we go. So all I'm asking you to do is pay attention to what your body is feeling. And it may feel different things with one word versus the other. Okay, here we go. No. No, don't say anything. Don't say anything. You can say it quietly in your mind. No. 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 Yes. 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 Okay, take a nice deep breath. Put one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly. And just take some nice deep breaths. Okay, switch it out. Hand on your chest goes your belly. Hand on your belly goes your chest. And just feel what that feels like. Okay, now turn it the other way. Whatever way feels better for you, put your hand that way. And just take some nice deep breaths. Okay, now with a survey of hands, how many of you felt that one way of putting your hands or the other, either way, it felt comforting to you? Raise your hand if it felt comforting. Raise your hand really high. Okay, so that's most people. How many were right hand on top felt most comforting? Raise your hand. How about left hand on top? Okay, good. Someone needs to study that. Everywhere it's the same thing, about a quarter or left hand on top, 3/4 right hand on top. No one knows why. You can go study it and figure it out. Okay, how many of you felt a difference in your body when I said no versus when I said yes? Raise your hand if you felt a difference. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my hand like this and just shout out, just in one word, what no felt like for you, one at a time. Go ahead, on this side. Horrible. What's that? What did no feel like? What felt scared? What else? Say it louder. It felt strong, okay. Nerve-wracking, okay. What's that? Uncomfortable, okay. And let's do yes. In contrast, what did yes feel like? What's that? Surprising. What's that? Soothing. Comfortable. What's that? I couldn't understand that. Okay. So now everyone, here's what I want to look at. If you take your thumb and put your thumb in the middle of your fingers, like that, in the middle of your palm, put your hand over the top. This is a really useful model of the brain you get to take home with you. It's your handout for today's presentation. And it's in your head like this. And I'm going to give you a brief overview of how this brain influenced what you just experienced and then how it gets remodeled. Okay? Everybody with me? So the brain is up in your head, right? Everybody knows that? Now take your brain model, all right? This part where your fingers are is called the cortex. And you can say that, please. Cortex, very good. Lift up your cortex and look at your thumb. That's called the limbic area. Can you say that? Limbic area. Lift up your limbic area, and this palm area is your brainstem. Okay. All right, you ready? Here's what we know about no and yes. When you hear no, deep in your brain, so lift up your cortex, lift up your limbic area, deep in your brainstem, there is a set of neurons in the brain in this area that is ready to fight back, to run away and flee, to freeze, or even to faint. So fighting back, some of you may have felt that when I said no, you're ready to fight back. Someone screamed out yes, you know. Some people get very terrified and they want to flee. Sometimes your body just gets paralyzed, you want to shut down. Sometimes you just literally collapse. So these are called reactive states. The no statement from some guy up on a stage creates in your brain a reactive state. And when you're feeling reactive, it can lead you to have difficulties with your friends, with your family. If you're reactive for long periods of time, it can be exhausting. It can even get you depressed. When you're reactive a long period of time, it can be really hard to learn in school. Now, unfortunately, if you put your limbic area over the top here, this limbic area works with the brainstem to drive our behavior. So if your brainstem is in a no-brain state, is what we call it, like what you heard when you felt no. This no-brain state makes you shut down from engaging with other people in a positive way or engaging in learning. A lot of adolescents are prone to getting in a no-brain state, and so for them, they pull back from other people, they pull back from teachers, and school is exhausting because they're constantly feeling threatened. I've worked in schools where unfortunately there are a lot of burnout and a lot of stress and anxiety and depression. And we look at this process because the school and the community creates this no-brain approach. You could feel how exhausting that would be. Now let's look at what the yes brain state is. In contrast, when you hear yes, or when you feel comforted with your hands the way we did them, what we know is the brain becomes what's called integrated. The whole thing, differentiated areas become linked to each other. And that, a colleague of mine calls the social engagement system. And it's where you feel open, you feel ready to connect to other people, and you're open to learning. So the first lesson of this no-yes experiment is that, in fact, if you feel you're in a reactive no-brain state, the only one who can really know that is you. It may be quiet. Like you may feel really terrified of something going on with some group of friends, or you may feel excluded and that you don't belong to your peer group. When you get in those reactive states, your brain is going to do all sorts of things, sometimes things you don't really want to do, to try to have a sense of belonging. That no-brain state is something you can become aware of, and you've learned a very simple technique, for example, of bringing yourself from a no-brain state into a yes brain state. And the only one responsible for that is you. Yes. It can happen really fast, and then it can stay for a long period of time. It's a really important question. And so whenever I work with people in schools, we start with that because once you're started to become aware of that, you go, okay, right now I'm in a reactive no-brain state. I got to take care of myself, stretch my body, drink some water, go walk around, remove myself from the situation enough so I can put myself in a yes brain state. Now, what that tells you, as we go now to these 4 elements of the essence of adolescence, is that when you see how this brain works, you got the brain stem that in part is regulating your body. It's determining if you're in a reactive state of threat, basically. When you're threatened, that's what gets turned on. And it could be a threat from literally physical danger, or a threat that you feel you won't be accepted by your peers, or a threat that it'll feel like you're not going to do well on a test. So these no-brain states can happen in lots of ways. If we now look at the limbic area, the biggest remodeling going on in your brain right now is in this limbic area. There's 5 different functions that it does, but the main one we're going to look at is emotion. This limbic area works with the brainstem and the body to create how you feel. And the biggest remodeling is happening in this area. So when you look at that, you realize that adolescents, when we do studies at UCLA and have adolescents come into our lab, and then at 10 years of age they're in the lab, and then at 12, and then at 14, and 16, and 18, and 20, and 22, and we just have them come through their whole adolescent period. Here's what we know. Number 1, the brain is remodeling, like we said. It's reshaping itself. That blew everybody away. What does that really mean? It actually means, and I don't want to scare anybody, but it means the brain is starting to whittle away, called pruning, some of the connections that you established in the first dozen years of life. So that can feel weird. If any of you work in gardens, you know pruning is a good thing to do, but you're actually cutting away existing plants and parts of plants. So pruning is the first part of remodeling. The second part is you're going to establish new connections among the parts of the brain that are remaining. So, for example, my son is a musician now. He's in his late 20s. When he was 11 and 12 and 13, he didn't want to do anything but play music. And then he would play music 6, 7, 8 hours a day. We'd have to tell him to stop playing so he could do his homework. But he maintained the circuits of music in him, so the instrument is like a part of his body. And if you ever listen to his music, which you can listen to online, you'll see it's just like he is music. It's not like he's just doing music. He's like music. He maintained that during adolescence. Our daughter did that with art. What you focus attention on during this period of your life is going to keep those circuits from pruning away. That's a decision you're up to. You're in the driver's seat about that. It's not up to any adult who's going to tell you do this or do that. But having a balance, in the Brainstorm book, you'll see a way to do that. But finding out what you have a passion about will keep those circuits alive. Now, the cortex, the highest part of the brain, is going to also be influenced by what happens with the limbic area, the brainstem, of the body, emotions. So as we go through these 4 things, you're going to see understanding this hand model of the brain, knowing your mind can say, I'm going to keep these circuits alive because they matter to me. It's not what your mom says, it's not what your dad says. It's actually up to you. So let's go through them. It spells the word essence, and that's going to be, we're going to talk about an emotional spark. I'll put these up here. What I'd like you to do is think about your life and how these have changed in your life. And on each of these, we're going to talk about part of essence is emotional spark. When you think about how you were when you were 8 versus how you are right now, how many of you would say the intensity of your emotional life is much bigger now than when you were 8? Anybody feel that way? Just people on this side of the room for some reason. Raise your hand so I can see. Oh, it's most people raising their hand. So this emotional spark is exactly what we see in all the scans. And there's a reason for it, which basically goes like this. Nature, not just for human beings, but nature for all mammals needs to have an adolescent period. The adolescent period is basically the period between childhood dependency and adult responsibility. That's what adolescence is. Childhood dependency and adult responsibility. Now you might say, why don't we just go from dependency to responsibility? Well, as mammals, we actually need a transition period for all sorts of reasons. But the emotional spark is, what emotion is a feeling in your body that evokes motion. It gets you ready to get out of the house, basically, which is fine. That's the upside. That's the reason for it. What's the downside of having more intense emotions? It can be more complicated. You can be irrational. All these emotions can take you over, and that's a natural part of adolescence. That does not mean there's anything wrong with you. It just means you're an adolescent, because emotions are more intense. When the limbic area pushes up on the cortex where you have your thinking and reasoning, it can be confusing sometimes. So that's the downside. What's the upside of an emotional spark? It can motivate you for sure. It actually is a passion and really feeling a vitality in life. And if you've ever, maybe this isn't your experience, but if I as an adult go out with my friends who are adults, right? And we're sitting at dinner at a restaurant and there's a group of adolescents having dinner next to us, who's having more fun? Adolescents. They're laughing and crying and screaming at each other. And here's what we do as adults. Can you pass the bread, please? Oh, I'm so tired. It's so tired. You know, a lot of adults have lost their emotional spark. So what emotional spark is, it's a passion for life. And this is why we say, don't let it go. Don't let what a lot of happens in culture destroy your passion. All the studies of adult development show adults who've held on to their passion have healthier brains. So that's number one, emotional spark. What's the second one? SE. So this is emotional spark. What does the SE stand for? Anyone know? SE of essence is social engagement. And the bottom line about social engagement is it's adolescents of all mammalian species are more collaborative with each other, but especially for us as human beings. And the sad things that in the high schools I've been to, many high schools promote competition, where you're told there are only a certain number of kids will get to this school or that class or whatever, and instead of supporting the collaboration that's there, they support people actually dividing from each other. And this is a serious, serious problem. So I work a lot with administrators of high schools of how you can rethink that. Now, what's the purpose of social engagement for adolescents? Well, if you're an antelope and you don't have other adolescent antelopes to leave the herd with, what's going to happen to you? You're going to be somebody's lunch. Connection for an adolescent is the same as survival. That's the reason for it. It gets you ready to leave as a group from your home base so you can survive. What's the downside of that? The downside is to keep membership going, you can actually lose your moral compass and do things you would never want to do. And that's the downside of social engagement. What's the upside is it teaches you skills that are the number one skill for well-being across the lifespan is your friendships. And this is the age when friendships and how you learn to establish them and hold on to them is being made. So it's one of the most important things. It's connection. The next thing is novelty. That's the N of essence. And why do adolescents seek novelty? What's the reason for it? because you're about to leave home in the next few years. So the predictability of your home life, the way you know what's going on there, your comfort with it, your familiarity with it, all that's going to be gone. So nature's got to do something that says, hey, when you were a kid, you loved going home and you knew exactly what the routine was. I need to do something to your brain to get you to leave home. And the way nature does it, two ways. Nature alters a system that goes from the cortex to the limbic area to the brainstem called the reward system. This reward system is run by a chemical called dopamine. And what nature does is nature drops the baseline level of dopamine in your... And then it raises the release levels. One of the main things that releases dopamine is novelty. Now, that's the reason for it. What's the downside to seeking novelty? Danger, big time danger. At your age, you may not know this, but you're about 3 times as likely to do something that causes permanent damage or death based on what you did or a colleague did. That's not just your parents' imagination. When you look at the statistics of adolescence, your bodies are healthier than at any other time of life. You're 3 times as likely to have a permanent image of your body or die based on what you chose to do. So that's a pretty wild thing. So let's talk about what that means in terms of what you can do about it. Let me give you an example. I had a professor who was driving his car, and then an adolescent who was 19 decided to drive this car about 100 miles an hour on a surface street. His friends were watching, and they thought it would be really cool if he could drive this car up to 100. So he thought, I'll give it a try on a curvy street. And unfortunately, my professor was leaving his home, and this kid crashed right into him. Now, let's put ourselves into the brain of that 19-year-old. Why would he do such a thing? Drive 100 miles an hour on a surface street. It's a cool thing. Exactly. So part of it would be his friends would think he's awesome, and he's rising the level of a cool dude, you know? Didn't feel so cool at my professor's funeral, but that's what he did. Now, dopamine gets released in a big way. And here's the downside. This kid should have been on a ski slope or should have been taught to do something else where he could challenge himself in new ways rather than a car on the city streets of LA. He didn't have what you have here. Now, the problem with that is the danger. Now, the dopamine thing is one thing. Another issue about dopamine, does anyone else know what dopamine is involved in? Drugs. Anything you become addicted to involves dopamine and the reward system. So if you're going to get addicted to something like cigarettes or alcohol or heroin or video games, it is most likely to happen between 12 and 24 years of age, because your dopamine system is unbelievably vulnerable to getting used to something that releases it, and everything that's addictive activates the dopamine system. So this is the downside. The other thing is there's something I just want to mention called hyper-rational thinking, which is basically the way the cortex changes in your brain. Only looks at the positive things. So think about that kid who killed my professor. Here's what happened in his brain. Oh, there's only a 40% chance that I'll hurt somebody or kill myself. So if you ask me, what's the most likely outcome of driving this car 100 miles an hour on this curvy surface street in Los Angeles? What's the actual hyper-rational answer to that? 60% chance I won't have an accident. So I say the most likely outcome is there's not going to be an accident, so I'll do it. See how ridiculous it is? But that's what the adolescent brain does. It actually overestimates danger, but just doesn't care about it. That's been studied. So What's the solution to that? The no-yes experience you had got you in touch with your body. Around your heart, literally, around your heart and around your intestine, you have networks of neurons that are acting as information processors called brains. You have a gut brain and a heart brain. If that kid had been taught the exercises you learn in Brainstorm, I'll bet you what would have happened when he was with his friends, and they said, "Oh, Joey, you could do it, you could do it, you could do it." His brain would have said, "I know I can do it. I'll be so cool. Everyone will think I'm the coolest dude." His heart would have said, "Don't do that, man." His gut would have said, "I don't care what my mom said. I don't care that that street sign says 35 miles per hour. Adults put that there. I don't care. But my gut is telling me don't do it." When you develop the intuition and wisdom of your heart and your intestines, it changes the decisions for your behavior. So novelty seeking is something you can change. And then finally, before we open up for questions, I just want to do the final one, which is CE. It's creative exploration. So if novelty seeking is having the courage to try new things, social engagement is connection, and emotional spark is the passion, creative exploration is the imagination. And I'll just summarize it this way. This is not true in everybody, but it's very common in adolescence. If the first 12 years of life were for you to learn how the world is, what adolescence is all about is for you to imagine how the world could be, and maybe even consider in your imagination how the world should be. So when you look at the fields of science, technology, media, art, and music, many, if not the vast majority of innovations, you know who they come from? You know what they come from? You. Adolescents are the source of creating a new world. So here's the way to think about it. Adults, you know, when you get to be this age, you get a little tired, you've found your niche in life, you do what you do, and at the end of your workday, you know what you want to do? Go to sleep. You have got a shift in your whole way your brain is functioning where you can start imagining the way things can be. And that's what creative explorations are all about. The reason it's there is to let you imagine how a world could be outside your family home. The downside is what? What's the downside of having creative explorations? What's that? You could be, well, too creative. What do you mean by too? Like as in what? You could cause danger because you'd be going way outside the window if you combine it with novelty seeking. Right, so you need to have a certain discipline to your imagination. Okay, that's great. What else? What would be another downside? Depression. You can actually look at the world and go, this sucks. And I know for my kids, or I'll think about even when I was an adolescent in your position, when this shift happened and I said, whoa, I remember being 10 and everything was like beautiful. And now, in that area, it was a nuclear war threat. You know, it was like, what have adults done to create such a nightmare? So it's depressing. It can be extremely depressing. But the good news is you're actually going to take over the world. You may not realize that, but if you put adolescents' minds together to come up with some solutions to some of the problems we as adults have not been able to handle, I'll bet you will turn the direction of this world around because of the creative explorations, the imagination of adolescence. So what I want to leave you with is that where attention goes, neural firing flows, neural connection grows. You individually can take care of the development of your own brain. You are not helpless to do it. There are exercises in that Brainstorm book that actually teach you how to make your brain stronger so you're not just feeling like, oh, I don't know what to do. There are steps to know what to do. The bigger issue is that we can actually support you in schools and in the future because you have this incredible opportunity to remind adults of all these things, the emotional spark that they need to remember to reignite in themselves, the social engagement, the connections with each other, the collaboration, the novelty-seeking, and the creative explorations. You can remind us of what we need. Now, I know that there are a bunch of questions that we need to get to, which we will right now. And so we're going to have them read off by your administrators of the district and the school and go through them. But let me thank you first before we get to these questions. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you.
All right. Can you guys hear me?
And just remember, you are in the driver's seat, and you can decide how you're going to drive, not just your brain.
All right, so you guys came up with a bunch of great questions. You submitted a bunch of them, and we only have time for a couple. So hopefully the ones we picked will touch on some of the things you were wondering about. The first one is, when thinking about bad decisions that teens might make, would you say that those can actually be beneficial for shaping who you are, your personality, developing your own wisdom, learning self-control and responsibility?
Yes, I think it's a fantastic question. And the idea is that adults really need to support adolescents in exploring new things and taking risks. There's no question about it. And so we don't want to be tamping down on these four aspects of the essence of adolescence. And at the same time, we want to empower adolescents so that what you can do is make decisions that are not going to be harmful to you or your friends or anyone around you. There's no reason that 19-year-old should have run over my teacher or anyone else, especially he'd crashed a car 2 months earlier. There's no reason that should happen. There's no reason you need to keep that statistic up where there's 3 times as likely you're going to injure yourself permanently. There's no reason to do that. You can take risks that don't involve that kind of permanent danger. Absolutely.
Cool. All right. So this next one I think applies not only to adolescents, but certainly to myself sometimes as well. What, in your opinion, is the best way to find motivation to do something you don't want to do?
So, it's a really great question. The limbic area works with the brainstem in motivating you. So you're asking the question, now that my motivation is shifted, what can I do? I would bet you that if you take the time to do what you can call time in, where you look inward at what matters to you, that let's say there's a history class you're not that interested in or math class, you can actually find a way to say, this is how this matters to me, and I'm going to now put energy into this thing because I found my own meaning. When things are meaningless, it's hard to have motivation to do them, but you're not passive. You're not helpless to find your own meaning. Now, teachers should try to help students find that, but that's the art of teaching. Yeah.
For sure. All right, so this one is, do you think research showing that the brain doesn't stop developing until a person reaches his or her 20s should influence the legal age at which someone votes, drives, drinks alcohol, etc.? At what age do you think a person should be legally considered an adult, and why?
Yeah, that's a huge and important question. Rental car companies knew this long ago. They would never rent a car to anyone under 25, so they kind of were the first people to know it. I don't think you have to wait. In fact, it's almost the opposite. I think we need to respect the capacity for adolescents to be responsible, and in a really deep way. I really do. And I think if you give people that belief in them, they rise to that level of capacity. So, that's what I would say.
Clearly, you guys liked that response. All right. Let's see. We probably have time for 1 or 2 more. Where should we go? How about when your brain is developing? Does each person's brain develop very differently, or do they develop relatively the same? Do all adolescents experience the same brain changes, even though it may impact each one differently?
Yeah, those are great questions, and I'll just briefly highlight a couple of issues. People have the onset of adolescence at different ages, and it isn't directly correlated to puberty when your body changes. So this remodeling does have different phases for different people, but generally 12 to 24, independent of gender even, there are patterns. You see different male, female, and every individual is unique, so people have their own pattern. But generally this pruning down in the beginning, the setting up for linkages, which basically makes the brain more integrated. An integrated brain is a fabulous brain. And the brainstorm exercises help you develop more integration, and ultimately, whatever the timing is, that's how it happens. So, for example, my own kids, they were in through periods like between 18 and 21 when they were completely different than how they were at 17 to 15 or how they were 21 to 25. And you just see these huge, huge differences, and you could feel that the brain was continuing to remodel itself, and that's what the research shows.
Kind of building on that, so a couple kids wondered about when you become an adult, do these qualities totally diminish? What are things that you can do to keep these a part of your life as you get older?
Exactly. It's a really great question. When I've surveyed adults, I would say the majority of adults, and don't get despairing, have lost their essence. And the good news is you can inspire them to get it back. But I was teaching at one high school, and one of the students raised his hand. He goes, "Oh, my God, I think I've just figured something out." I said, "What's that?" He goes, "Well, if the essence of adolescence is what adults need to keep their brains young and strong and growing throughout the lifespan," I said, "Yes, that's the truth." He goes, "And most of them lose it." I said, "Yeah, that's what it seems to be the case." He goes, "Maybe that's why they hate us so much. Maybe they're jealous."
Some truth
He's
to that.
a genius, that's right. So you've got to wonder sometimes. So the point is, and the reason I wrote Brainstorm for you to read, and adults can also read it, but it's written for an adolescent to read, is because you need to have some book that helps you know the truth. And when adults have read it, they've actually revived their essence. So it's never too late to get it back, and it's important to get it back.
Cool. All right, so maybe we have time for one more, would you say, about? So this might be opening up a can of worms, but might not
Open
be a
it
simple
away.
answer.
Open it away.
Someone was wondering, do our phones affect our brain development?
To our phone, what do you guys think? So, here are just some thoughts for you to think about. When you're with your friends and you are looking them in the face, hearing what they say, feeling their responses to you, noticing their nonverbal signals, you are developing a part of your brain, it's mostly in the right hemisphere, that allows you to literally feel the mind of another person. That is one of the most important skills you could be learning now. So remember, where attention goes, neural firing flows, neural connection goes. What I notice in my own kids, and one is 28 now, so he's older, the musician is that age, he had this experience, and you can hear it, Alex Siegel in some of his songs. He had this experience of connecting that when our daughter, who's now 23, she was growing up in the age of social media. Unlike him, he was a little too old for that. And in her group of friends, they stopped having a lot of face-to-face time. And that's what the research shows about these smartphones. These smartphones have only been around about 10 years. You may not realize that. When you're having a lot of your attention go to a screen, you're spending a lot of very important time activating parts of your brain that have nothing to do with what I call mind sight, seeing the mind of your friend, knowing your own mind. And what the research shows is that the more time you spend on screens, not just phones, but on tablets and on computers, the less you develop the capacity for emotional awareness in yourself, emotional awareness in others, for you to be resilient and actually be able to go from a no-brain state to a yes-brain state. So just to bring it full circle to how we started today, when people spend a lot of time on screens and not reflecting inwardly with time in, or reflecting with another person in real-time communication, what happens is they are really not developing the circuits for being aware of what their body feels. So when their brainstem activates the no-brain state, they're not even aware of it. So they're fighting back, they're fleeing, they're freezing up, they're collapsing, and they're not even aware of that stuff because the brainstem can do that without you knowing it. So when you see people who've spent so much time on screens and not connecting with themselves or with other people in real time, sadly what you see is they don't have emotional awareness or resilience. They don't even have the art of conversing with another person that's as well developed as it might be. So this is where what I want to leave you with is the great news, and the important thing about this question is if you want to, you can let yourself become addicted to your phones. You can. Go for it. And you can develop a very thin kind of brain reaction. And you know who's going to win? The phone company wins. All the apps win. Because you know what it's really all about? They're out to get your money. That's really what it's all about. The people who created that stuff, they all want to get your money. And you're just falling into it. So if you really want to be strong and you really want to be who you are, try considering turning that down and getting in touch with your friends, getting in touch with yourself. And then you're going to develop a really integrated, strong way of living. And you know, when you do that, what you realize is being kind and compassionate to yourself, being connected to yourself, being kind and compassionate to others, that's up to you. It's up to you how you're going to have your brain grow. Now you have the path on how to do it. Now you can make the choice. Thank you. Thank you.